Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Gaming Nation, and welcome to the Dice Ball podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the Genesis role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hooly, and with this episode, we've got a great topic to discuss that I think a lot of new and even some existing players will get a lot out of. But for the moment, let me introduce you to the people who are my Laurel to my Yenny, my co-hosts and best friends in the world, GM Huzz, GM Flano, GM Kaitlin. How are we all?
Doing all right.
I'm actually not doing so well. As you can probably tell from my voice. So I'll be doing most of the podcast via interpretive dance or through my interpreter.
Greetings. I am VK75, a Helcom Industries assassin droid. Usually my primary purpose is the disintegration of nominated targets. However, today I am using my interpretation subroutine for GM Kaitlin. It would appear her inferior meatbag's voice box has malfunctioned.
Thank you very much, VK. So if you don't hear me talking very much, it's because I'm doing it through interpretive dance.
You've had the flu, yeah?
We've all had the flu.
Oh, well, that is true.
Yeah.
We have.
Caitlin's just last to get it.
Which is never...
Like me with most jokes.
All right, so what has everybody been up to? Mike?
Well, I've been general gaming, playing a bit of Star Wars Legion, role-playing, playing a lot of BattleTech on PC. I'm currently very addicted to that.
I didn't realise that it had come back out again. See, I'm just completely under the radar when it comes to...
It's amazing. If you get a chance, play it.
Well, it's the first time BattleTech has made it to like a digital platform in its true sense.
Yeah.
Because it's usually Mech Warrior, and it's always a first-person sim-based sort of game where you pilot the mech. This one, you actually control a lance of mechs. You are like the mercenary lance commander, so you have to do jobs, pay for repairs, balance the books, and all sorts of things. It's quite cool. And as of recording this, I've just hit 10k million in my bank account, so I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah.
Only if real life was so fun in terms of balancing the books. So I'm terrible at that.
Cool. Martin?
BattleTech.
Right. You two are addicted.
Yeah, but been doing a lot of other things as well. You know, we've played some board games as a group. We've done... I don't know. I've been playing Vampire the Masquerade as well.
Okay.
Which is one of the regular games.
Speaking of...
Oh, yes. New edition is coming out soon.
Were they Kickstarting
Fifth edition.
or are they already
No.
Kickstarting it?
It's available for pre-order through Modifius Games.
And they're the guys that do Star Trek and
Infinity.
Conan and Infinity and whatever else.
Yeah, they're a pretty good company.
They do good stuff.
But yeah, Vampire the Masquerade is one of my all-time favorite settings. And the new 5th edition updates all of the lore to bring it up to current date, because the last edition ended in like 2000 or something. I can't remember. So yeah, there's a lot of time to catch up on.
Right. Are they using the same sort of system as far as like D10s?
Is D10 still called to those dice?
Yes, but then I don't think they have numbers on them anymore.
No, they're symbols.
Yeah, it is a new type of dice.
Right.
And the system's all new. Like Celerity doesn't give you multiple actions anymore, which is a bit of an improvement, but also a divergence from what was there previously.
Cool.
So it should be interesting, and I'm excited to see what they've done.
Yeah, I've never played Vampire. I've known about it, but never played it. But I'm interested to pick this up on this edition because the artwork on the covers looks so amazing.
Oh, the artwork has always been amazing with Vampire.
Well, after seeing the quality of like the Infinity RPG rulebook and the effort they put into that, I'm very keen to see the quality Modifius put into this.
I just
be quite nice.
Wish that I had the $1,000 to drop on the hand-bound leather book. That
How much?
1,000.
Wow.
They're super duper limited edition collectors.
There's like 50 of them being made or 100 of them being made or something like that.
But knowing how many people are into vampire and werewolf and everything like that, they should be doing more than 50 because I'm sure they'd sell them.
Well, yeah, but there is another version.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's you've got your standard edition, and then you've got like a collector's edition, and then you've got the hand-bound leather book, which is
very pretty.
Yeah.
Very pretty.
And if they do too many of them, it no longer becomes special. So limited to 50 keeps its value.
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
True. But hey, look, if they've got multiple dice, that means they have a dice pool.
Absolutely.
We might have to take a look at that when it comes out. Kaitlin, what have you been up to?
So, what have I been up to, VK?
Kaitlin has mostly been dying slowly from a cold. However, in between her death throes, she has been playing lots of games and including Stars Without Number. Her character has an awesome moment last session, which GM Mike and Martin will love to tell you all about it. Get to it, meatbags.
BK's a little bit pushy.
I didn't program that into.
Oh dear. So, well, tell us, guys. Tell us a little bit about what happened with Stars Without Numbers.
Yes, GM Caitlin's character, because her character is a psychic power wielding person.
Yeah.
And sort of had a run into with a bit of a, what would you call that moment? Like
it's like an artifact. It's the element that she ran into in the Stars Without Number setting is something that allows you to focus your psychic energies. But yeah, it's something that normally allows you to focus it, but there was a little bit more going on with it because it was in a testing facility, and something could happen to it. But it was also encased inside of a mechanical arm.
Oh.
And it got inside of her head because it had been whispering to her.
As it does.
Sorry, her character. What's your character's name again?
Oh, Martin.
I'm a little bit hurt.
Hey, I remember the story.
But of course you did. It was amazing. His name is Dante.
Dante, that's right. Dante had this thing whispering in his head, telling him all sorts of things. And when Dante came in contact with it, he basically replaced his arm.
Oh, my God.
Psychic surgery, let's call it.
Wow.
It was a rip. It was a rip-off. Absolute rip-off.
It was.
Literally a rip-off of your arm?
Psychically.
It teleported away bit by bit, didn't it?
Ouch.
Little bits of both, because
How
I'm
very
so
infinity
sorry
war.
you guys have to listen to this voice, but it started like teleporting and telepathically moving away from my body in my arm. Please stop laughing at me.
I'm not.
And basically you passed out at one point, and it when you woke up, you had this arm that was like black metal with glowing purple all over it, which was
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
and then Dante just waltzes out to meet us as we're leaving, and we're like, oh, okay. Dr. Ray is like, I'm gonna have to check that later.
Wow.
This is a thing now.
Yeah, this is the thing.
Right.
Although he was a bit preoccupied with his own bounty hunter trying to kill him. So yeah,
Very, very Winter Soldierish.
Seeing as though none of these other heartless meatbags have asked, I'll ask. GM Hooly, what have you been up to?
Well, thank you, our wonderful droid. Basically, I haven't been up to a lot gaming-wise. I've had a little bit of a lull in that, but I've been busy doing a few other little bits here and there. I've been working on the Ghostbusters setting. I've been working with Chris Witt on some of the settings that he's doing with Familiar, and doing my own little superhero setting as well as stuff on Night's Edge. But I guess the only big gaming stuff that we did was we recorded a massive session of Night's Edge, which we did all in one day, which was a monstrous task, but so much fun.
That's going to break the immersion when people listen to it. They're going to know it's all a ruse.
Maybe.
but it was a fun ruse.
It was fun. No, it was a lot of fun doing that. But yeah, so around the net, anything interesting or stuff that you guys have been doing as far as settings or anything like that goes?
Oh, Hooly, I think you found something that was pretty interesting. You were mentioning earlier that
I did in relation to GM Flano and I were having a conversation. Actually, we're all having a conversation before about next campaigns that we might run. and one of them was a pirating campaign.
Yeah.
Well, I happened to come across a thing which was done by a guy by the username of McCure. Sorry if I've got that wrong, on the FFG forums. And he or she, I'm not quite sure, has designed it's not really a setting, but it's sort of like a supplement of sorts. Which is Warships and Merchant Ships of the Age of Sails, which has a whole heap of ships from caravels all the way up to the big warships. So if anybody is looking for that sort of thing, you can find that on the FFG forums. And it's really well done. Very brief. Yeah. It's probably only around about 15 or so pages. But no, absolutely fantastic work. So
pretty much all you'd need to be able to run that sort of campaign.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm super happy they did it for me.
So yeah. Mike.
Speaking of potential settings, I know me and GM Flano were discussing the other day, because we have been, as you probably guessed at the start of the show, fairly fixated on BattleTech, and we're talking about ways of how we could introduce that to Genesis. And me and Martin had a bit of a debate or discussion, you could say, about how you would implement the actual mech combat rules into Genesis, because Genesis has very strong vehicle rules.
It does,
no doubting it. But the thing is, the only problem I saw with that was because BattleTech, the heart of BattleTech is very tactical combat, where the exact maneuvering of the vehicles or mech, is very paramount into everything you do. And I was worried that Genesis might not necessarily be able to support that, because it's meant to be more narrative, free-flowing, very, descriptive, loosey-goosey vehicle combat, which is great.
Which is its strength.
But that's sort of the opposite to what BattleTech is meant to be. So we're brainstorming some ideas on how to make that work. And one of them was, add additional rules to Genesis to make it a little bit more crunchy, but then what is the point of that? So we're looking at ways of how we could implement maybe two game systems together. I know that could be a little bit dangerous when you're playing an RPG, having two game systems rolling as one. But we thought about maybe introducing the Alpha Strike BattleTech rules into Genesis. Essentially, all it would be is you play Genesis for everything else. Your narrative, your interpersonal conflicts, interactions, and etc. But as soon as you go down to an actual legit combat, you just change your rules to your Alpha Strike rules, and off you go. Because the Alpha Strike rules are very streamlined version of the regular BattleTech rules, which are super heavy and dense.
But the thing I like is that your pilot actually has stats which would correlate to the Genesis system.
Exactly. The piloting on a mech has a stat range between 0 and 4, I think, is the highest in Alpha Strike, which is a great correlation, because you can use your ranks in piloting or gunnery or whatever and translate that straight into Alpha Strike. So if you have gunnery 3, that will apply to your mech in Alpha Strike.
That's cool.
A skill of 3.
Pretty easy way to do it. So,
because doing this Alpha Strike, what would you call it, transfusion into Genesis, makes it so much easier. You don't have to worry about recreating all your battle mechs, because
there are a lot.
There is a lot. There's easily 300 plus battle mechs.
And I'd love to give it a go sometime, but I don't know. I don't have that kind of time. And
weapon systems, gear and tech. BattleTech, it's, rich, deep mech stuff is what it does. And to sort of skimp on that feels like you're skimping on the point of BattleTech. You might as well be playing a generic battle mech game if you're missing out on
which
those
I'd still like to do.
Oh, absolutely. Would love to do a battle mech game in Genesis in some way, shape or form, even if it is more streamlined, less tactical combat.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that I happen to find online as well, which I've been talking to the designer of, and that would be the Lord of the Rings version for Genesis.
Yep.
The work that he has done is exceptional. So we'll get a link up on our website as well as on the Facebook page. That you can download that. It's just a PDF, but he's done a lot of work and continues to make a few improvements as well. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. The other thing as well is the vectorized Terranoth character sheet. Somebody was kind enough to do that. Now I know that the previous vectorized version that he did, our friend Kaitlin decided that it was a really good plan when she was playing Stars Without Number to make it a bit, what was it, A1 in size?
A1.
A1 in size, and it was
It was a bed
filled the table.
bed sheet.
It was
I actually So, actually, I did take photos, like, just for the lols of me using it as a bed sheet.
Yes.
I love that.
I think I definitely want to get it printed as a bed sheet now.
Well, we all laugh at it as a gaff, but GM Kaitlin has used that giant character sheet image several times as a character sheet in Stars of Our Number because she's forgotten a character sheet several times.
Are you character sheet shaming me right now?
Yes.
Yes.
That's really bad because I can't defend against it.
But
Accurate.
Yes. So the Terranoth version of the vectorized sheet is very, very nice, and there's a couple of versions that you can download that from the FFG forums as well as our website, and again on the Facebook page.
Hey, listen, we challenged listeners to do the giant character sheet last time, and none of you went through with it except for GM Kaitlin. So I'm very disappointed. So someone better outdo us and do a giant. Is there a size larger than A1?
A0.
A0.
No, don't do this. I need what I can take.
Yeah, but this is the Terranoth code sheet. So, and last but not least as well, Toby Wheatley, who is a fan of the show, he just, without being prompted.
This was very exciting.
This was exciting. So we might actually... Okay, so basically what it is that he is a composer.
This is a man that composes himself quite well.
Oh, Mike. That's terrible.
Did you say that's treble?
No, you're treble.
Oh, that's okay.
Anyway, so what he did is he designed a...
Just get to the base of the problem.
No, it was very basic.
Oh, no.
This is like torture for me.
What?
Because you can't join in.
Wow. Anyway, so what he did is he did a...
No. You need to refrain yourself, Kaitlin.
Oh, no.
All around me are familiar faces.
Just for the record.
Can someone tape his mouth shut? Anyway.
That worked out well for the Deadpool, didn't it?
Did. So, Toby has done, he's composed a piece for us for the introduction to Night's Edge, and it's really good, really good. Listen to that for the next episode. Actually, it'll be the episode that people have already listened to, but anyway, that's all right. The magic of podcasting. Anyway, guys, so if you, the listener, have something of interest you'd like us to bring up on the show or anything you'd like us to share, let us know on any of our social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, or send us an email to info@thedicepoolpodcast.com. So should we get into our main discussion?
Don't you mean the core of the show?
Yeah, something like that.
That was my line.
I heard Yanni.
Core of the show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we will take a deep dive into a topic concerning the Genesis role-playing game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, experienced GMs and players will know that there is one thing that drives the Genesis RPG and the Star Wars RPG before it, and that is the almighty story point. Now, one of the things that, while I was trolling the FFG forums, was that I found a little topic that was started by a person by the name of Gamer TNT. Now, they started off by asking how many story points do people get at the start of the game, but it quickly turned into several posters not really understanding what story points do, how they can stop players hoarding them, etc., etc. And so what I thought was, wouldn't this make for a great show topic? So for this episode, my good listeners of the Gamer Nation, we'll be tackling the almighty story point, the hows, the whens, the whys, and how you, as both a GM and a player, can add flavour like never before to your game. So where do we start? Mike?
Well, you'll find the main rules for story points on page 27 of the Genesis core rulebook. Now, brief summary of what they can do for you as the GM and the players. They can provide a helping hand in upgrading your skill pools. In terms of upgrading a dice to a yellow, from a green to a yellow, which everyone loves.
Yep.
Raising the stakes, the GM can do pretty much exactly the same to the players. Make the check a little bit more difficult and add that threatening red dice, which every player dreads when they're in a situation where a red dice isn't necessarily that fun to deal with.
Yep.
They can also be used to activate special abilities and talents, either by the GM or the players, depending on the characters that are on the table at the time. Yep. And finally, you can use the players and GM can use story points for luck and Deus Ex Machina, which all affects the narrative by introducing cool things like, hey, I want to find this useful torch in my back pocket. Spend a story point. Torch is there. And it's assumed you've had it all along, but it's just never been noted on your character sheet. That's just a very, very vague outline of what you can do with story points because they are hands down, one of the best tools in this game.
Yep, agreed.
So we'll be going across and covering in a little bit more detail and expanding upon story points and giving you guys, the listeners, a better idea how to use them in your games.
So, Martin, let us into how do you work out how many story points that you have for a story, for a session?
For a session, basically, it's very simple. Everyone gets one, including the storyteller who gets a bad one.
That depends on your own perspective, doesn't it?
Well, perspective is very important in this system. So I think yes.
So, yeah, cool. So how can they be a tool for both players and GMs to enhance the narrative, which, in my opinion, is probably the most important thing of the story point? Because as Mike said, it is probably one of the most powerful narrative tools, which is in this game that we so love. And I think it sets it apart from many, many systems. I know that D&D tried to do it a little while ago at one stage with one of their splat books.
Pathfinder 2 at one point, I think.
Oh, did it?
They call them hero points, or
like every system has tried to do something similar.
Yeah. But I think that the Genesis certainly has done it the best.
It's when I was thinking about this earlier on, and I think that Genesis and Star Wars beforehand is one of the only game or RPG systems which has your story points or hero points or whatever you want to call them hard baked into the actual game mechanics itself. Yeah. Every other system that uses a very similar mechanic. It feels very bolted on. Like spend a point to get a reroll, spend a point to add a narrative element.
Yeah, or it's optional.
It's optional, exactly. But there's so much in Genesis that's ingrained with story points, talents, and other special cool abilities like in Star Wars. It's signature talents can all be used by spending story points, and it's quite a robust little thing that's interwoven into the game, which is very cool.
So how can we use them to be more narrative, though? Because I mean, one of the last points, as Mike said, the Lux and Deus Ex Machina, that you can use that to affect the narrative. I mean,
well, the way I see it, the way it gets used the most by both players and storytellers at the table is upgrading and downgrading dice.
Yeah,
that's where it sort of, enters into the game.
I'll be honest, the most boring way to use them too.
It is, however, but there are ways to make that better.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I like the idea of whenever you spend one to do this, explaining how that enters into the narrative.
Yes.
The other thing to keep in mind as well is if you are the storyteller, don't just be throwing, an upgrade everywhere, just because you want to make it more difficult for your players. Think about what does it mean to the player or to the story if you get a despair on that red dice.
Yep.
And if it's something that's going to be dramatically appropriate and actually add to the narrative, chuck red dice at the players because it's gonna make things better, not worse.
Yeah.
I guess a good general rule of thumb would be, going by that, is if you're the GM and you're upgrading the dice pool, you have to have something in mind of what to use a despair for. If that despair comes up, then the game sort of pauses for like 5 minutes while everyone decides what that despair is for. If the situation is dire enough, a despair should be easily worked out what it's used for.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind. If you're going to upgrade, be prepared to work out a despair.
Yeah. And your players are probably going to know exactly what it's going to what is going to happen when that despair comes up, because if they're trying to tightrope walk across to get to the next place and you go, we're going to upgrade that because it's very windy up here, they know exactly what's going to happen, and it adds dramatic tension.
Yes. Yeah. I'm a little bit reminded about what happened with Knight's Edge, that there was a flip of a story point from the GM's perspective, and the reasoning that I gave at the time was lightning.
Yep.
And when that despair came up, I knew exactly where that despair was going to be coming from.
Absolutely.
So that's why I think that it's important, rather than just say, I'm going to flip a destiny point. Well, sorry, I do this all the time. Flip a story point is that you do, as you say, you need to know where that's going to come from because that's going to be your answer at the end of the day.
On a quick side note, we should tell listeners right now, if we say story points or destiny points, they're interchangeable in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because to us, destiny points is what they have always been. So having to call it story points is a hard gear to change. So
exactly.
If you hear destiny points, we mean story points.
Yep.
Disclaimer.
But that's it. There is definitely an advisory warning, on the packet for story points.
Yeah.
Don't add it if you don't know what it's going to be used for, because there's no faster way to derail a campaign than having despairs come up that completely just derail the game because players die or players get delayed and it takes away from where the story is heading.
Agreed. Because there is nothing worse than being in the middle of a session and suddenly you get a despair because you've decided to flip a destiny point. And it either doesn't really suit the narrative or it doesn't really suit the direction of where you were going to be taking the story in the first place. And then you've got to spend time to go, where did that come from? What is that going to do? And that slows down play. And that's the last thing that you want to do. You want the story to be fast-paced. So have that before you make that check. Have it in the back of your mind where that's going to be spent.
I guess as well, if using the upgrading the dice with the story points as we're talking about now, if you're a GM with a group of players, when either the GM or anyone at the table, if someone flips a story point to upgraded dice, most of the time, if they're a newer group, they're not going to explain what that looks like.
No. Yeah.
You as a player at that table, even the GM, when they flip that story point, just ask them, hey, dude, what does that look like? Explain to me narratively why this extra advantage is coming your way, or in the case of the GM, why this extra disadvantage is coming my way. Because what it does, it's a very small thing, but it adds that little bit extra layer of narrative and helps paint the overall picture. Because if you're, for example, a player, you're flying a spaceship and you flip a story point to upgrade your check. And you can say, okay, I reach down to my control panel, I flick open a little panel, and I press the afterburner button, which I only use in dice situations. Yeah. It's a limited fuel reserve. I smack it, and that gives me the upgrade to my dice check for my piloting check.
And I call it fleshing out the narrative.
Yeah.
And absolutely. It is a great way to do that. But that's it. The advice that we've given to storytellers, though, applies absolutely to the players as well.
Yeah, players, GMs, it's all the same.
Yeah, but think about what you would spend that triumph on before you add extra dice. Yep. Like keep that in your mind because it's going to speed play, it's going to enhance the narrative, and it's
And while we're also talking about it as well, the other thing that GMs and players have to remember is that if you've used a story point to upgrade a check, then you've made a check, and then all of a sudden you need to activate another ability which enables you to change dice or does something additionally, that you can't actually do it because you can only spend 1 point per check. There are some exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, according to the devs anyway, is that, you're only supposed to spend it once per turn, effectively.
It's very oddly, it's very, I wouldn't say vague, how it's written in the rule books in terms of spending multiple story points in one check is kind of wobbly. We had to ask Sam Stewart to clarify it for us, and he said the intent was 1 story point per player per check or per instance of you rolling dice.
So you can get more per round, but when you're rolling one set of dice, you're really only supposed to spend 1.
Yeah, because one of the things that Chris Witt, and I mentioned this in the last episode as well, was that it should be a case of 1 check per player per turn. So if they're trying to do multiple things at once, roll it into the 1 check, depending on what it is, obviously, rather than doing multiple checks. And that kind of alleviates the problem then of having spending 1 story point per turn.
Yeah. And the only time that you sort of see that change is when you get to the like tier 5 talents and things like that, where you start to make more than 1 check per round.
Yeah.
So that sort of gives you the idea that it should be something that is epic or, amazing that would cause you to do that, which is not what we're trying to do here.
No, that's right. The other thing to remember as well is that there is an exception to the rule as far as spending the 1 story point per turn, especially at the start of current generation or start of the campaign. in Terranoth, each of your characters has a heroic ability, and it takes 2 story points to activate. So that's the only time that you can actually spend 2 of them. There are other talents. There are certainly a lot of talents in Star Wars that you have to spend 2 story points. I think that was more the signature abilities, I think it was. So, which is kind of what the heroic abilities sort of emulate anyway. So yeah.
And of course, that's all raw. If you and your group want to allow spending multiple points in a turn, then so be it.
Yep. But just be aware of balance issues and things like that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So spending multiple though, talking about ways that you can use story points. The other one is affecting the narrative. And so the other thing that I would suggest though is if you are introducing a story element and it's a pretty big thing, sometimes you might want to spend more than 1.
Well, before we get too far into that conversation, perhaps we should talk about introducing story elements in the basic level.
And we can come back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that basically brings us to the final point as to how the points are spent rules-wise, and that's affecting the narrative. So what that effectively means is that if there's something that Star Wars does it best, as the example that they use, but we can use it in any sort of Genesis setting, that if you were really badly injured and you really needed to find a bandage or something like that so that you can do some healing, that you flip a story point and you search a room and you happen to manage to find one, or you really need rope to get across a chasm. So you flip a story point and you remember to do that back in the town that you were last at and you bought some rope. So you can have that, or grappling hook, or whatever it is that it is.
Usually you have to spend the money to
spend the money
cover it
at the same time. Exactly. So that's one sort of way that you can affect the narrative. But there are others, and I think this is the one thing that makes it so interesting for a story, that effectively the players or the GM can take control of the narrative more so than we've seen in any other game, I think.
Yeah, well, this is, for me, what makes the game more cooperative storytelling than any other system I've been in.
Yeah.
It's honestly, to me, the narrative dice, apart from the narrative dice itself and what they implement, the story points and being able to use them to add layers to the narrative, to the scenes around you, is by far one of my favorite things about this game. So I love being able to go, okay, I'm going to spend a story point and I want to introduce this cool fact. Like, we're in a car, we're running from the police, and there's a train line coming up. Awesome. We've all seen the movie, how the bad guys get away from the police or whoever's being chased. We go over that train line, we flip a story point. Just as we get over the line, that freight train comes screaming by, and all the police sort of get lost or delayed enough anyway to give us a bit of chance of getting away. It forces the police to either, find a detour and we get a free turn in the chase scene or something like that. It allows you to add these interesting elements which the GM and the players at the table haven't really thought about in advance, but on the fly they can help build the scene.
Yep.
Well, I mean, the players could say that, or if it's not something that the players have thought of, because you don't want this to become adversarial where the players spend a point to make a train appear and then...
It's the hardest thing about story points is making them non-adversarial.
But the storyteller could have used the story point in that instance instead to make the train cut the players off from their escape.
Absolutely.
Exactly. If we're looking at the opposing and the players hadn't thought about that.
Exactly.
Another way that we talked about it in the previous episode when we started talking about encounters when it comes to vehicles and finding a vehicle. Flip a story point and suddenly that bike that you needed to escape to get away from the bad guys that you were chasing, or your friend in a taxi, to quote a recent film that just happened to be sort of waiting nearby.
Well, that's very Deus Ex Machina. That whole,
absolutely.
Which is a blend between story and introducing objects into the game.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The thing that I think is hardest for some people to gather when they're doing this, especially if you're a storyteller, is normally in other games you would just add these elements. You just put them in, and there's no mechanic to doing that because you're the storyteller. But sometimes that can feel really bad to the players. So one of the good things about story points in this case is, say your players need to get away and they've got a car waiting outside. This is part of their plan. They get out into the car and you're like, I need to delay them for a little bit.
Battery's flat.
Yeah, the battery's flat in the car. You left the lights on. Flip a story point.
Yeah.
And this is good because you're doing something to the players to disrupt their plans.
Yep.
You're creating story, but you're rewarding them for it.
That's it.
Yep.
And also what that's done, the mechanic in the group suddenly has a little mini scene of his own to jump out of the car, open the bonnet and see what's going on. That one introduction, one little fact has given one player an entire little spotlight scene. And that can lead on to other things. So you've flipped the story point and had the car have a dead battery. The mechanic hops out of the car. He opens the bonnet. The police sirens are wailing in the background. There's a lot of stress in the situation. He makes his check. He fails horribly with lots of threats. He's crossed the wires on the car, pretty much blows the engine.
Yeah.
And
Perhaps because there was an upgrade earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or just through lots and lots of threat. Like he rolls 5 threat and all the electronics in the car just die. The alternator fries. All of a sudden, that story point's been flipped, which has introduced a complication to the story, has given the players a bit of a problem to solve now because they no longer have a car and the cops are just around the corner. And that points the story in a whole new direction. Suddenly it's a foot chase.
Yeah.
Nor the GM or the players have thought about a foot chase. And suddenly the really athletic streetwise character of the party is like, well, I know a way. He flips a story point and he knows about a alleyway that leads off into a sewer network, very Terminator 2 style. It's cool what you can do. And
this creates a great back and forth with the story points that the players and the GM can both use. It's great. This is what I love.
Yeah. And I think that is the key thing. And I know that this is basically what the poster on the FFG forum had a problem with, was having players hold on to story points. It's almost like a unwritten rule to not have them do that and not do that as a GM either, is to spend them.
It's tough.
You should be spending them. Like, if they're sitting there doing nothing, they're not doing their job.
Well, by not spending, players who don't spend story points, they think they're being very clever. End of the day, all they're doing is stifling their enjoyment of the game. If they want to sit there on their story points and hold them away from the GM because they have this weird adversarial mindset, great. The only person you're affecting is yourself. Give it a try. Just spend them. Have fun. Success through failure sometimes. Sometimes when a story takes a weird angle because a GM spends a story point and introduces a bad or negative or whatever situation, that can sometimes mean some really good effects for players later on.
I never look at it, as being negative. It's not, your storyteller isn't introducing negative facts.
But these type of players are quite clearly thinking it's negative. It's not negative. It's a story. A good story has problematic moments.
It has challenges for the players to overcome and triumph over. So when you're trying to starve the storyteller of story points, you're starving yourself of story.
Absolutely. And an RPG isn't a competitive game.
No.
There's plenty of competitive games out there. Don't treat an RPG as a competition. It's not. It's not a competition between you and the GM. Have fun. Have fun with the story and let it go where it goes.
The same thing goes for if you're a GM, holding up all the story points and not allowing your players to actually use them.
Exactly.
And that actually brings me to a sort of a side point about story points. Make sure you have them set up somewhere so they're clearly seen by the players and the GM.
Yes.
GM Hooly uses a cool magnetic board on his GM screen, which has them clearly on display for the players. But he's quite clearly used to that. He's always checking to see what story points are there. He reaches over the top and has a feel for what magnetic tokens are still stuck to the board. However, I've been in his GM chair and used his GM screen before, and I know I forget. I just forget how many story points I've spent. I know personally, just for me, I like to have them sitting in 2 separate pools or whatever on the side of the table in front of me so the players can see them. If you're a more experienced group who sort of is keeping a conscious surveillance, I guess is a good word you could say, of the story points, not so much of a big deal. But if a new group who's not so familiar with their existence, make them very obvious on the table so the players know that they're there to be used.
Yeah, and personally for me, I like to use reversible tokens of some sort, and you just place them, anywhere on the table where it's visible to everyone. Usually just in the center of the table, have it in a little, I don't know, just somewhere there where they can all see it. But short of that, if you've got like a whiteboard or something, you can do a little tally up on the wall or something,
What I've seen some people do is that they'll get poker chips, but they'll like glue a white one and a black one together, and then that becomes the one that you flip.
Becomes a reversible,
and it's a nice size. And I've seen people with 3D printing these days.
3D printing,
that they'll do up a 3D printing and they'll just paint it so that it's a pretty clear cut. What is a story point and what's a GM story point and a player story point. The thing that I did when we did Night's Edge is that because I'm trying to move away from using a GM screen as much as possible. It's an interesting way of running a game by having it, because you can have a little, it's a great place to keep your notes. You can sort of make sure that your dice rolls are sort of a little bit mysterious and whatever else.
There are points for and against.
Look, there are, and there are a lot, and I'm sure that that's almost another show topic completely. GM screen or no GM screen.
It heavily comes down to the mindset of the GM. Some GMs like to be very secret and adversarial to the player. Not adversarial, but very secretive to the players, because sometimes it is important to fudge numbers.
True.
Sometimes. Not all the time, but this is a murky conversation.
Let's not dive into that one just yet. But it comes down to who your players are and who you are as a storyteller, and as long as those two factors come in together, that's how you decide what you do.
Yeah. Honestly, if I've got a GM screen in front of me, it's not there to keep any secrets. It's there so I can see the critical hit charts. That's really about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we've just gotten sidetracked a little bit.
You mentioned GM screens.
So what I did is that with I think it's Lear Tools, which is they've got an initiative board, which is absolutely fantastic, and I should send them an email and ask them if it's possible to do one which is a little bit higher, because it's perfect for at the top or in the middle part. You have basically your initiative slot, you have your arrow at the top to indicate what initiative slot you're on, but then in the bottom row, what you have is you then have your story points as well. Because then it's visual, it's available to everyone to see, and it's also available for the GM to see, and you have it at the opposite end of the table. Doesn't help if you've got a fifth player, of course, because we only had 4 players.
I mean, you can put it up on a wall.
You can, absolutely. All different ways that you can do it, as long as you make it, as Huzz said before, as long as you make it able to be seen by everyone at the table, so that it's first and foremost in their minds. Yeah. That it's there as a resource to spend.
Some of my most favourite ways of using story points as well is to allow characters to have a narrative moment or a really epic scene that's not as restricted by the mechanics of the system. It can allow you to, if you want to describe something that your character is going to do and it's a little bit more than maybe what the mechanics will allow, a story point can give you that little bit more freedom just to have that awesome moment, particularly if you describe it well enough. Don't just say, I want to be able to do 6 different things in this scene. Can I flip the story point to do it? Describe it, make that an actual moment with the character, and actually have it adding to the narrative of what is taking place. And some of the most amazing moments in the game has actually come from a story point flip, which has allowed your character to do something amazing and has allowed other players to feed off that. And as we were talking about before, you create, there's all of a sudden what was going to be a normal car chase is now going to be a foot chase kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that allows people to feed off and create narratives based on what the other characters and players are doing.
And sometimes when you introduce those cool character moments with story points, it's fun to watch the GM's face when he's trying to work out what you're trying to plan.
Yeah, okay.
But in saying that as well, and looking at it from the other side of the screen, some of my most favorite gamey moments as well has been when nothing is said. The GM doesn't say anything. He just looks at the players and reaches over and flips a story point. Something's just happened, but as a character, you don't know what's happened yet. No. So even then, I just said, make sure you make it narrative and fit into the story.
That's right.
Sometimes if you're the GM, you don't have to do that, and it can still be amazing.
Well, you will be spending that narratively just later on. You're delaying the narrative, but
you'll
it's there.
Explain it.
Setting up.
Yeah. Because they'll be thinking about that for the next hour.
Yeah. Hour? What are you talking about? I think about that for days.
Hey, also, going by that, be really cool? Listen, players, close your ears. GMs, listen. At the start of a session, maybe like in the first half an hour, just do that. Flip a sneaky story point
And
across.
it means absolutely nothing.
Exactly. It means nothing, but eventually something will come up during the game. You go, well, little did you know. And that story point I spent, 2 hours ago, totally planned this.
Yep.
And the players then were like, oh,
Magic.
Jiminy Jillikas.
What a way to censor yourself. I didn't even know that was possible.
It was tough.
That wasn't a GM Hooly putting
No,
expertise
no,
right
no.
there.
That was me getting whiplash from.
So yeah, but no, you're absolutely right. That there is when you can do stuff like that, and sort of it almost becomes like a bit of foreshadowing when you're looking at it from a storyline perspective. That flip a story point and just go, okay, carry on.
It's like a tangible foreshadowing.
Yeah.
And foreshadowing is a very hard thing to set up in an RPG.
Yep.
So unless you drive a really heavy narrative beforehand or pull all ththese strings and set something up.
Yep.
However, you can still set that really heavy sort of dread in your players by simply just flipping a token across.
Yep.
And that's just a perfect example of why these story points are such powerful tools when they're used other than just upgrading dice or used at all.
Yeah. Well,
Just make sure you do actually use it.
yeah.
And don't just flip it over and then forget that you flipped it. Because that's a big way of losing trust with your players because it just looks like you're cheating.
Six games later.
Exactly.
Oh, it's coming. It's coming. And when it does, you're all going to regret it.
Yes, at the start of every session, you just do it. And then you're like, well, you'll find out eventually what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But it is the same sort of concept of like banking despairs. If you don't have something readily to spend it on at that moment, you can just say, well, something's happened in the background.
Yeah.
And so
The best thing the GM can say in that circumstance is, I know what I'm going to use that on, and don't say anything. And the players will go, well, okay, we're doomed. And then later on, by the same principle, you can just pull that despair out of that's been floating around in space and then use it.
my tip is to write it down in your handy dandy little notebook that you keep next to you at all times.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think another one as well. It always makes me go into a panic attack. But when you're in a moment where there's a time crunch and then all of a sudden the GM starts holding up fingers, counting down, it's kind of the same principle as that.
Yeah.
But nothing to say is when your characters are maybe not making a decision as quickly as it needs to happen. Look at this story point getting flipped right now.
Well, that's what the Infinity RPG does. It has a heat system, and if the players are mucking about and not making a decision, the GM just gets to build up his heat pool, and if that heat pool, he can spend that heat to upgrade his character's attacks and introduce story elements and whatnot. And as GM Kaitlin just said, you can use it for a very similar principle in this. If the players are taking the time and taking ages to make a decision, just start spending their story points, and they're going to get very upset.
But just don't use it as a punishment.
No.
as
No,
well.
and that's the
Like,
whole
that's the
thing.
thing.
Yeah.
It's a bottle. It's like we were talking about before. Is like, you're only robbing yourself of the narrative by not spending the points, and that goes both ways. But it can also be the same way as make sure it's fun. Whatever you're going to do with it, as long as you're going to have fun with it and it's not a punishment or it's not you guys were talking too long and, gas bagging, not gaming. So therefore, guess what? Darth Vader's turning up around the corner and TPK is just around the corner too.
Well, that's what happened.
That kind of thing.
That's what happened in Dragon Squadron, wasn't it?
I tried to, but Vixto saved the day.
That's right.
Delete that moment because, oh my God, my voice.
But the other thing to keep in mind when you are spending story points is to keep it non-adversarial is to, when your player spends to upgrade, your response, or they introduce a story element, your response shouldn't always be, I'm going to spend a point back, right? You should be like, let them have their moment and then do something.
Yeah.
Then introduce a fact. Like there can be absolutely times where you can introduce something immediately where it's where it's appropriate, but don't let that be every role.
Yeah.
And I think that does go both ways as well.
Absolutely.
I think that if you, as a GM, because the way that a story point works, to bring it back to its basics, is that the person whose turn it is has the opportunity to spend that story point first.
This is something we should talk about, I think.
Absolutely. So what happens is that if the person whose turn it is, they get to, whether it be the player or the GM, they get to flip a story point. And then it's up to the opposition, if we want to turn that into a little bit adversarial, but the other side.
Sounded too much like sport and you lost me.
Are we still recording?
How was that local sports team?
So, but then the opposing side then has the opportunity then to flip a story point back to upgrade the check if that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
And this is what you're saying, Flano, is that you don't want the GM to be, well, if you're going to flip a story point or the player.
Because it's you don't want them, your mindset shouldn't be, I'm going to flip it because they flipped it.
No, that's right.
Like, absolutely, you should be, or you could be spending them, back and forth. But it shouldn't be your mindset that's how it's done.
No, that's right.
It's not ping pong.
It's not ping pong. Don't play it like ping pong.
As long as there's a story element there.
Yes.
And that's that I think brings us back to how we started this discussion in the first place, is that as long as there's a reason there in the first place to spend that story point, then make that happen.
And as GM Mike was saying, is if your player doesn't have something and they just want to spend a point, you just say, well, and what does that look like?
Yeah. That's right. It's a nice prompter.
I think one other thing as well is that when we're talking about using them and spending them is to not be selfish around it. I mean, there's, generally you look at one story point per person, but I know for me, when it comes to sharing story points, I'll be like, should I upgrade this check? We've only got one left. Like, what does the group consensus say and all that kind of stuff? And that can be a real thing. But if you've got a really cool story moment, use it, and allow the other players. Don't go, I was going to use it for this thing, which was going to be way more cool than what you were going to do. No, don't do that. Allow the story to happen, and then allow the GM to then come back and flip it back when it comes to the next time. And keep an eye out on that kind of stuff as well, because if people are using them and using them well, reward them by using it just as much back at them.
And that's a good point, because it's not so much of a problem in Genesis at the moment, but it may become not necessarily a problem. It might become a thing to be aware of. Because I know Terranoth has introduced heroic abilities, which use 2 story points. Star Wars, before Genesis, a lot of later tier talents, lots of Jedi abilities use story points. And if you've got one Jedi in the group, it tends to be them using all the story points, and then the rest of the players have none.
And you had more in Star Wars.
It's tough because you don't want to hamstring that one player whose character is quite strong and has those cool abilities. So he should be able to use those abilities, but that player should also keep his mind on the fact that their story points are just as important to other players as they are to their character. Sure, those story points might necessarily be fueling, mechanical written down benefits on those other characters, but they're still going to be fueling the narrative and allowing those other characters to do cool things.
Yeah, so keep other players in mind, but don't be afraid to spend them.
Yeah, it really is tough. It's a tricky one.
Because the thing with a story point or story point pool, effectively, is that it is a group resource. It's not just your player resource. And Mike's got a very good point when it comes to Jedi and Star Wars, is that when they're rolling their white die for their force abilities, if they're rolling all blacks to activate any powers, which might be so important at the moment, they're going to need to spend that story point, or in their case, a destiny point.
Which isn't a system so much in here, but
so far.
But Mike said it as well with the heroic abilities. That's 2 story points. That's actually quite substantial amount of a cost.
Right at the start of the campaign.
And if you've got a player of 4 people, there's half your dice pool gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Your, not dice
story
pool.
Point.
My bad. There's half of your story point pool gone right there. So it is that important of having that really big back and forth. And it was as soon as we saw 2 story points for that, I immediately thought there has to be a little bit more communication, but as well as allowing people to have their moment and to have their spotlight.
It's certainly going to be heroic when they use it.
Oh yeah,
I think
as it should be.
Yeah,
I agree.
We're talking with probably a very lucky filter in the fact that we have a very a group of players that we play with all know each other very well, and we have a general understanding of gentlemen's manners at the table in terms of spending story points and whatnot.
Poor Kaitlin.
and
I have the most gentlemanly of manners. Thank you very much.
It really gets my goat.
Oh dear.
No,
poor goat.
Poor goat. Back to what I was saying. Sorry, I'm going to re-edit that. for free. No, seriously.
Nah, keep
what was I saying? Yeah, if you happen to be playing with a group of random players, like you've gone to your local shop, or you're new in a group, or the players,
or you're at a convention,
yes, or you just don't know the other players at the table that well because you've only just met and you've only just started your group.
Yeah.
So I guess you could probably imply a bit of a hard and fast rule on the expenditure of story points.
Yep.
Maybe allow you can only spend a story point if the majority of the table agree to it's being spent. I know that sounds a little bit communist state, but it sort of takes
Sometimes.
away. Yeah, it will take away a little bit of ambiguity, not ambiguity.
Well, because as much as you don't want to create an adversarial environment between you and the storyteller, you do not want adversary between players.
No, that's right.
That would be a really good thing to include in your session 0.
Oh, yes, good call.
We should do an episode on that.
We should. That would be such a good topic because it's so much to talk about. But seriously, we talk about how are we going to run the game? How are you going to spend story points and how are your players going to work together in spending those story points, as well as the GM. Like, we want to make sure that you're using those story points just as much as the players are. Session 0 is a really good way of nutting that out, particularly if you've got new players you've never played with before.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, because I think it feels way worse to the players or as a player when it feels worse than hoarding all of the story points as a player. It feels worse for the game when the storyteller does that, when he's just not spending them, because you as a player, you don't really want to say something and it's all sitting on his side and you're like, I can't do anything.
I would do that, but wink, wink.
If the storyteller's hoarding the points, it's generally not anything malicious. It's more the fact that storytellers have a billion things going on, and the last thing they're worrying about is the pool.
Yeah,
but I'm like, I know
it's tough.
It's tough. Do you say something?
To be honest, you should.
Yeah,
I think, and I know that you guys do all the time.
Well,
just to let you know that there's all the story points are on your side,
and you're really good at using them. Like,
I try to.
I'm also going to lift the curtain a little bit here.
Oh, okay. Go, dude. Go.
We're excellent at baiting them out of you too.
This is so true.
And there's nothing
Did
wrong with that.
Did you want to upgrade that check there, Ian? I do.
That's what I wanted you to do all along.
But you know what? There is
I sounded okay doing that.
Right. Your new podcasting voice.
The evil villain.
But seriously, that I think there's nothing wrong with that because, again, it's a collaborative storytelling moment. So if you're sort of suggesting stuff to your GM, and your GM is, as Mike said before, is doing 50 gazillion things at once, or a butt ton, as I think somebody actually said that it was a definition of a butt ton.
There is. It has to do with wine.
Wow. Thank you.
I had a different word in front of the tongue, but I'm not allowed to say it.
But there is, and I've completely lost track of what I was saying. What was I saying?
You're surmising that basically there's no harm in it because it's adding to the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's absolutely no problem in my mind to be telling the GM and communicating with them that this is what's going on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
You know, whether it be, oh, by the way, you remembered that you did get a triumph with that last check, or, you know, nobody's ever going to forget that the GM's rolled a despair on his roll or her roll.
Unless they're hiding it.
But so it is a case that communicate with everyone at the table. And again, it goes down to what we were talking about before about spending them. One of the things that I think is important when it comes to communication with everybody at the table is to just turn to everyone and say, is it okay if I spend a story point?
Yeah.
There is no problem with that, I don't think.
No, 9 times out of 10, nobody's going to say, no, you can't spend that. What are you even thinking of?
It's when a player just goes pow and just does it.
And I've had players in my games like that, and they've just gone, no, I'm going to flip a story point, and without asking anybody at the table.
Yeah.
And that, to be honest, that creates a little bit of that adversarialness because it is a group resource. Yeah. It's something that everybody at the table gets to use. So, you know, just
turning
polite.
Yeah, just turning to them and saying, you know, look, I'd like to spend it. You know, is it all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, as I say, 9 times out of 10, nobody's going to tell you no.
And I love seeing a goody Jedi, using a story point and flipping their dark, using the dark pips on their force dice, because that just makes people warm and fuzzy inside, seeing them become a little bit more. Yeah, it's good.
There's nothing to say as well as going, I want to use my story, I want to do this with story point, what do you guys think? And then someone might go, oh, we've only got one left, and I was looking at doing that. then that's an awesome opportunity for you guys to go, well, if you're wanting to do that and I'm wanting to do this, how do we make this work so we both can have our moment?
You can build a story.
Exactly. It could be, oh, well, if you're going to do that, that actually would be a lot better. How about I do this? That'll boost your next check and we work together on it.
And
or vice versa.
And talking about it like that gives the storyteller an opportunity to go, oh, you know what? Well, I was going to upgrade that check.
Exactly right. Exactly. Because you want the players to be able to do cool stuff. And so if you're watching and monitoring the table and you're listening to that sort of banter go on between players, you go, right, well, I want that person to be able to activate that ability, and I love that they're working together. I want to reward that. So flip some story points, as a GM.
I feel like there's a really good topic here for another time about communication at the table. Because it is hugely important. If you're not communicating as players or as a storyteller
or characters,
it doesn't work.
And
it just enriches everything if you're talking about it. Don't just think it, say it.
Exactly. Mechanically, something else as well that I just wanted to mention, that again, another rule within the system is that if there are, I'll use the example of a GM. So the GM has the story point for the table has all flipped to the GM pool. And the GM says, I'm going to spend a point. According to the rules, the players can't then spend that point because that point is effectively in limbo. And that's the only time that it happens, when it's all either on the player side or it's all on the GM side. So if the GM has spent all of their story points and all of the points are on the player side, if the players want to upgrade, the GM certainly can't. So that's just something to keep in mind as well, which I know that we didn't mention, so I thought I might mention that now.
And we do say, try not to hoard them all the time, you should be spending them. But sometimes if you're going for that really dramatic moment, it could, but
that is true.
Just keep it all in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Random thing.
Yes.
That's just popped into my head. It's probably related to more something we talked about a little while ago. That floating despair that comes up that you may be expecting, a good way of using that. You stash it away like we said before, or you spend that despair as the GM to flip a light side story, a player story point to the GM side.
That's a really good idea.
That's interesting.
Effective, and it can be used for anything later on.
I wouldn't do it all the time. But
So I think if you use it all the time, it'd be your quick way out, I think. But if you did it when you're really, really stuck, if you have to pause and think for more than 3 minutes, flip it across or do something else.
Or mark it down, save it for later.
Exactly.
Or the universe is shifting against you.
Because it's effectively, all you're doing then is effectively doing what you're already doing by saving that point for later on. But it's signaling to the players that you don't necessarily know what you're going to use it on. But as you say, it's the fate shifting, it's a universe realigning in a more or less positive way for the players. And that, again, just adds foreshadowing, which is really cool. Especially if they've only got 1 point left in their pool. And you go, oh, sorry, kids. Let's flip it across, and it's all gone.
And also, we can't forget one of the cool abilities for the standard human as well. That they have the ability to be able to flip that story point.
Out of turn incidental.
It is a really good... That is
very, very powerful ability.
That does help offset what we're talking about earlier, the players using story points regularly for abilities. That helps offset it, because if you had a whole table full of regular humans, those points are coming back all the time.
Well, because there are so many... compared to Star Wars, there are a lot less, generally speaking, story points on the field. So having abilities like that really help, especially if, as was pointed out before, if you've got 4 players at the table and 1 storyteller, you've almost spent half your pool just to use a heroic ability. So having stuff like that really helps.
Yeah, it does.
Absolutely.
In Star Wars, it's possible. If you had 4 players at the table, it's possible to have 8 story points.
Sure is.
Fate point, Destiny points.
Destiny
I'm forgetting the names already.
But so definitely, as far as there's a lot more there than in Genesis. So we've pretty much covered the way that story points can be spent according to the book. We've talked about how we can work our story points. into the narrative to enhance the narrative effectively.
Yeah.
We've talked about, as far as the rules go, how many story points they start with, how story points actually work, as far as the mechanics of how they physically work on the table, the best ways to display story points at the table, how to ensure that story points don't become adversarial, and also what to do when both players and GMs hoard story points. Yeah. Anything else that you can think of that would be of great benefit to players and GMs for how to spend these story points?
I have lots up my sleeve still.
Do you?
Well, as a person who likes to break games rules and add new rules, story points are fantastic for just allowing players and the GMs to bend rules.
Yep.
There's some really clear-cut examples, and even the Genesis rulebook and the optional rules at the back give some suggestions, such as using a different skill, a different characteristic for a skill. One of the suggestions is to say, allow a player to spend a story point to use one characteristic, on a different skill that wouldn't normally be associated to. That's one example, but there's plenty of others. So if a player in your game wants to do a particularly powerful shot with their gun, they've overcharged a weapon. You say, okay, cool, you can do that. Spend a story point, and I'm going to give you an extra 2 or 3 damage on the weapon. Yeah. That's a very rough example, but depending on how much you want to follow the written rules or not follow the written rules, you can use story points to really add a lot of flavor and growth to your game in terms of flexibility of what you and the players can do on the fly.
Yeah, you can effectively bend reality, so to speak, with some of the things that you do.
Yeah.
The other thing that I find that you guys do a lot is when it comes to introducing those things that, for example, you might ask me, does this particular place have a backdoor entrance?
Yeah.
And I say, I don't know. Does it? You know, and that's how I try to rephrase or to phrase it is go, well, I don't know, does it? Or if any sort of questions that I don't know, because let's face it, a lot of the time that when I'm running a game, I am running it on the fly, is that I go, I don't know. And then you go, right, well, we're going to flip a story point. And that then becomes that reality. Your effect, I like to call it you're creating table canon.
Yeah, that effectively comes down to the core element of what the story points are for. Yep. And I think the main element a lot of players miss out on. They don't pick up on that. Story points aren't just there for a mechanical buff to your dice rolls. They're there to do exactly what GM Hooly just said. Yep. Add to the story and introduce facts that no one's planned. And that's and that really does come back to what we talked about before, but in a more directed sort of manner, which is cool.
I've got 2 things. The first one is I've seen it suggested that you can use a story point in order to say the players are a little bit lost. They don't know where to go next. They can spend a story point to get instruction or suggestions from the storyteller.
Yep.
I think that's a great use of it, but I feel like that sometimes ends up being, the players might have an idea of something that they want to do, but they don't know how to do it. So they ask for suggestions, and then the storyteller tells them exactly what they were thinking, and that sort of feels cheap. I feel like it's better if when that sort of thing, you see the players are getting a little bit lost, that you reach across and you spend the story point to introduce an element to drive the players forward. I think that's a much better way to use it because it means that you're creating story rather than having this whole out of character moment, out of game moment. You're spicing things up. You're driving the story. You're giving the players motivation. Not something to use all the time, but when things are lagging and they don't know where to go, 2 guys with guns can jump out. It can drive story.
Yep.
Don't bog the game down in combat, please.
No. Look, I think that I agree with you to a point.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I think that you run the risk of then is then kind of almost having that adversarial, because you're taking away something away from them as well. I think that if you're going to do that, fine. But here's a different way of doing it.
Sure.
You flip a GM story point and you tell the story from your perspective, from the bad guy's perspective, so that you're moving the story forward, but at the same time, it is a case of monkey see, monkey do. That effectively what will happen is they'll go, oh, so you can do that to the story. Perhaps we can as well. And so you then sort of, teaching how to spend the story points in the first place.
So when you say tell it from the bad guy's perspective, what do you mean?
As far as like that if the players, they're a little bit stuck as to what happened.
Yep.
Similar to what you just said before, as far as you flip a story point and the bad guys show up.
Well, not necessarily the bad guys.
Story to them, or something interesting happens.
Yeah, something interesting happens.
That's going to be potentially a negative towards the PCs.
Not always negative.
Because you're spending your own story points as opposed to, and you're giving back the players a story point of their own, so then that they don't feel that you're stealing their points.
Yeah. That you're not spending their point.
Yes,
you're always spending your point to introduce a story element.
Right.
So a good way of a good example would be the players are. They're sitting at the bar, because they're trying to track down the bad guy and find out where he's gone. But they have no idea how to do it. None of them have streetwise. They're in a bad spot.
It's when the players start stalling at the table. I think that's what GM Flano is trying to. Am I right? I think every GM and every player has run into that moment where just the story sort of just doesn't flounder on anyone's behalf or fault. It's just the players sort of get stuck.
It stalls.
Yeah.
And when you feel that come along, let players spend that story point to give them a nudge in the right direction.
Yeah. Or alternatively, what I'm suggesting is that you reach across, you spend one of your story points, which gives them a story point as well, which can fuel story.
Yep.
But say they're at the bar and they're floundering trying to come up with a plan for where to go. They've got no clues, or you've given them hundreds, but they haven't picked up on it.
Right.
You can flip that story point and a guy stumbles into the bar. Not an adversary, not a bad guy, just a guy. And he starts, His
name is MacGuffin.
MacGuffin. Exactly. Because your story points don't have to be negative.
No, not at all.
Yeah, this guy sits down at the table, at the bar, and he orders a drink, and then he starts loudly complaining about these guys down the road that are, this gunfight that was happening down the road or something. Some story element that they can overhear as players.
He bought some, really dodgy crack from them because
whatever.
Look, I guess when it comes to any sort of story points, is that the story point idea is that it's not currency. It's not as though that at the end of the game, whoever's got the most points wins.
Yeah,
it is just it's an element of the game to tell the story better.
Yeah,
I think so. If you're spending a story point for
it's he who dares wins.
So I think that it is if you're spending those story points, just allow them to be spent. As if you're spending your own and you're helping the players out, it's no big deal.
No, exactly.
Another cool way to spend story points. You've set up a combat for your PCs.
Yeah,
right.
You've got 4 minion groups and a couple of adversaries. Your minion groups get wiped in one round. And it's going to be a very boring, dull combat, and your adversary needs to get away or try to get away at the very least, not just stand there and be captured. Because let's face it, you as a GM are directing a scene, an action scene for players for more or less a theatre of our mind adventure. So if it's boring, then there's not much of a theatre of the mind if they just capture that adversary instantly. So spend a story point. Add more reinforcements of minions. They come swarming in through zip lines or through doors or whatever.
Or add a third party. So they're fighting in the street and the police rock up.
Exactly.
Create confusion.
Perfect example. That's right.
Perfect.
And yes, you don't want to spend story points in that way all the time just to add extra.
No, because that becomes adversarial.
Yeah.
Well, that too. And you don't want to combat the drag on for 3 or 4 hours. So only do it when you think there's reason to do it, because you don't want it to become too quick or too boring or anything like that.
And you don't always want to be snatching victory from the players either. But sometimes, yes, it can be used just to drive the story.
You want to give the players a chance to use their cool talents, their cool weapons, their cool abilities. You want to give your players the opportunity to call out cool, descriptive, epic moments in potential fights and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that is just a example of a physical gunfight or sword fight or whatever. How about in a social encounter, for example?
Yeah.
You're in a courtroom. The case is going swimmingly for the players. All of a sudden, a new witness gets brought into the courtroom through this expansion of a story point.
Objection, Your Honour. We haven't had a chance to vet this witness.
Exactly. Perfect example of a story point being spent, which is great.
New evidence has come to hand. Yes, I like that.
Or the players spend a story point, and they have to have a friend. They have a friend up on the jury.
Yeah.
Or one of their contacts has managed to find a surprise witness or something like that. You know, it does work both ways.
Oh, one of their people in the gang on the outside has managed to bribe one of the the judge.
Why are the PCs suddenly gangsters?
Can we play?
Hang on, I'm waiting for it. And Kaitlin, you're about to say?
Can we do a Law
Yeah,
and
there
Order?
you go. I knew that was covered.
I want to do a Law and Order themed campaign now. And like at every time the story point flips, it's just the dun dun.
I was thinking of, Phoenix Wright.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. But there's all sorts of things that you can do with story points. And as we say, and I know that we've gone on for over an hour and a half talking about them. But
I said before I had two things.
Oh, yes, you did. Yes.
Sorry, what?
Two things interjected by lots of things.
We were mentioning under the themes in the Genesis Core rulebook, there is pulp.
Yes.
Which gives us a couple of extra optional rules that you can use when spending your story points.
Exactly. So that's on page 248 of the core rulebook for those who are interested and are following on at home. It talks about the new, it's a new rule and it's called the cliffhanger. Now, basically what it says is that at the end of the session or encounter, the PCs are left in immediate peril. So if something horrendous has happened and you finish the session that way, or if you've just finished that particular scene, that they can, at the beginning of the next session or the encounter, that the PCs can flip all of the story points over to the GM side, and a number of things can obviously happen. So there's different ways, and by all means, we're not going to go through the rules here. Just take a look at other options, and there are other options throughout the book about how to spend story points in different ways.
Well, and part of your session 0 could be describing a way that you'd like to introduce for players to spend these story points.
Absolutely.
By all means, go nuts.
Because this is not a finite thing as to how that they're spent. So, Kaitlin, do you have anything else about GM story points or player story points?
I shouldn't have been nodding my head in agreement. Now I'm getting it thrown over to me. Well, no, it's you hit the nail on the head there. There isn't a hard, fast rules on how to use them. It's kind of like your triumph moments, basically, but at free will without having the dice roll and, knowing my roles. If I didn't have story points, I'd never have triumphant moments. But anyway, it's neither here nor there, and I'm not bitter about it whatsoever.
Just be more like Mads and triumphs.
What is it with Mads and her triumphs?
To be honest, that's just my life motto. Just be more like Mads, and things will get better. Oh God, too real.
Jesus, too real. Wow.
No, but seriously, it when you think about how to spend a triumph, it can be the same way as how to spend a story point. It doesn't have to be as I'm going to upgrade my check, or I don't really particularly feel like doing a whole shopping spree narratively within games, so I'm just going to flip a story point and that's there, and it's really, really cool, and here's the money. Which, how I think all types of transactions should be done in game, unless it's got a social encounter attached to it.
That's right.
But, it's a moment to have fun. It's a moment to have your amazing epic moment with your characters. It can be so much more than just upgrading the dice pool and seeing how it goes. And I think once players get a hang of adding that narrative and adding that spice to their characters and their character development, it'll just be a lot more free-flowing, kind of like how it is for us when we game. And it's not even a second thought. It's, I have something really cool I want to do. Can I please flip a story point and do 6 backflips?
Wow.
Because it's going to be amazing, right? Just trust me. Let me flip the pig.
Just hold my beer.
Exactly. It is actually, Martin, you've hit the nail on the head there. I'm just going to wrap it up with the story point should be the hold my beer moment.
Yeah, it should. Yeah.
What was my favourite line in Dragon Squadron?
You've had a few.
I've got a plan.
Yes, that's right. To be fair, that's also your favorite line outside of things. We had GM Huzz and I were just chatting today, and it was one of those ones where it was just like whenever GM I keep on wanting to say GM Michael. Whenever GM Huzz goes, I have a bad idea, and my response is generally, I'm listening.
One last thing.
Yes.
One last thing. Just to wrap it up. We can never teach you how to, perfectly use story points. It's going to come down for, just practice, playing the game, getting your idea around how to use. Similar to what, GM Kaitlin was just saying, just like triumphs and despairs, etc.
Yeah.
You can, baby steps. You use examples in the book, work your way up, and don't feel shackled to the rules as written. Branch out, allow cool things to happen. But most importantly, don't hoard them, use them, have fun.
You'll find the dynamic in your game by playing.
Exactly.
Like trial and error. Just go with the flow.
Absolutely. Cool. So I think that was an amazing discussion. If I was new to Genesis, I think that would be a very, very important topic for me on how to run it, because it's a short section in the book. I think it ends up going for about a page. But it's so much of it's the heart and soul of this game, in my opinion.
The dice in this.
Yeah, look, I agree. So, but yeah, it is something which is so powerful to allow the characters, allow the players to have that narrative control, just generally with the story anyway, as part of narrative storytelling and narrative role-playing games. But this takes it to, turns it up to 11. And I think it's absolutely fantastic.
And because it is such a short section of the rules, I think that's probably why it's often so easily overlooked and misunderstood.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully we've explained that to you, the listener, and you will get something out of that and make your games a little bit better. So as I said, that was pretty amazing. So if you've got a show topic that you would like us to discuss, let us know via email at info@thedicepoolpodcast.com or via Facebook messages, which is where we get most of our communication from. And of course, you can also message us on Twitter. We've got a couple of new topics in the works. And obviously during the shows, we also come up with topics ourselves as different little things come up. So I believe we've got some questions now.
I question everything in life.
Do you? Well, I know that some people have got some questions. So,
do you have a segment for that?
Look, we do.
Do you want to brainstorm a name?
Can we call it Behind the Screens?
Behind the Screams?
Behind the Screens.
That's my Halloween special.
It's like my favorite topic, behind the screens.
Behind the Screens. And welcome to Behind the Screens, where we, the hosts of the show, will answer your games and rules questions regarding the Genesis role-playing game. Now, first up, I do have a follow-up from last episode with regards to the whole grapple versus tumble debate. Now, it would appear that the question was asked to the FFG forums and a response was received. Now, basically what the story with it is that grapple negates the tumble.
So you can't tumble if you're grappled.
Correct.
Okay.
The way that it works is that the tumble affects the movement.
Yeah.
But grapple imposes a condition.
I see, because it's imposing a cost for you to be able to leave that area. Yeah. And if you don't meet that cost, even by using another talent, you can't leave that area.
Correct.
It's just odd that talent trumps the talent, though. That's...
Which is why I like our solution.
Yeah.
But use whatever you want is appropriate in your game.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. But anyway, that's the official ruling. So, Kaitlin, who's our first question from tonight?
So I'm going to apologise in advance. So sorry, Lance, that I'm reading out and I'm butchering reading your question in advance. But Lance asks, if I wanted to make a spell that creates a wall of fire, how would I do it? This spell would be in a fixed location, but damage is dealt if walked through. Would this be a barrier or an attack spell? If so, how would you create the difficulty?
So I think we're going to turn to our resident spell...
Magic Man.
I was going to say spell expert, but sure.
No, Magic Man is much better.
Magic Man.
Magic Mike. Man.
Which is
Mykin? Oh my God.
So, Martin, you had a solution for this particular gentleman.
Yes, and I had a little bit of a think about it, and my answer is neither.
Right.
we wouldn't use barrier or attack.
It's controversial.
The reason being is barrier doesn't deal damage. Barrier is like additional soak that it gives you. It's a force field.
Yep.
Attack is an instantaneous effect which goes off and causes damage. And what you're really doing is conjuring a wall of fire. So conjure is the action that I would use. And it says this action represents the ability of a spellcaster to animate objects or create items or even allies out of thin air and the aether, which I think really describes what we're doing because you can, with the conjure spell, select a location and create something in that location.
Yep.
You can select the size of the thing that you're creating, aka the additional effects medium summon and grand summon. So if you need to create a larger wall, built in, that's how you do it. If you need to, you could even create multiple using the additional summon. So you can put walls down in multiple areas. If you need it to be created further away, you've got the range adjustment and all of this. And just like if you're creating or summoning a creature, it doesn't go into exactly how you'd go about the rules of, determining what the stats of that minion would be. That's something you work out between you and your storyteller. Same with the wall. Say you want to fill a doorway with a wall of fire. So you don't really need to make, any adjustments for range because you're within short range. You don't need to do anything more than a basic summon because it's a small area. So you've got one difficulty. You do that, you cast your spell. Say you get 3 successes. How do you know how much damage this wall does if someone tries to walk through it? I would look to the magic attack rules for how much damage you deal with a spell.
Yep.
Which is quite simply your magic casting stat. So if you're using Arcana, it's intellect plus your uncancelled successes. So you roll 3 successes, you've got 3 intellect. It'll deal 6 damage, which is soakable if someone tries to walk through it. Although if it's a door, I'd probably just conjure a piece of, cement and walk away.
Yeah, but that's not as cool, though.
Exactly.
If you're a
There are
pyro
different.
wizard.
Yes. And if you want to maintain it over multiple turns, you just look at the concentration rules. Spend a maneuver every round, and it'll stay in place.
I know that. Sorry,
I was
Kaitlin.
going to have a question. How would you use the story point to make that even cooler?
Oh, topical.
That is exactly what I was about to say, strangely enough.
Brainwaves.
See, we're on the same level.
I'm glad I got mine in first so it didn't look like I was copying.
Well, you know what I'll do? I would make
do.
it.
I want to
You want to
know
know because you asked the question.
Well, no, I already know because I'm already reading everyone's mind.
Okay.
But I'll let you say it.
Potentially, with the use of a story point, you could, be bland and upgrade the magic check.
Yep.
Or you can say to the GM, I want this fire to be so fierce and raging that if anyone wants to get through it, then they're going to need to first pass a discipline check.
Like a fear check type thing.
Yeah.
Because not only is it fire, but this is a screaming fire from the pits of hell, wailing with the souls of the damned.
The flames are green.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I want to play in this game now.
Yeah.
See, I get to say it now.
Oh, this is Terranoth. I want to play a Terranoth game, and you promised.
Yes, I did. But yeah, so it's like obviously in this sort of circumstance because you're making it sort of, if you wanted to go by what GM Flano has said, is that you might, rather than just the base difficulty of easy, you might be taking it up to average. And you can obviously add on little bits and pieces here and there, whether it be the range of the thing, whether it be how many there are, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you just keep on adding difficulty to the check.
Yeah.
If it ends up being your signature spell, that's going to reduce the difficulty by 1. There's all sorts of things, but I will be honest and say that is the last thing that I would have thought of about creating that spell. Yeah. And as soon as you mentioned use conjure, I can't think of anything better than that because all that you're doing is just summoning an inanimate object that happens to be a wall.
You happen to be conjuring it, perhaps.
Exactly.
Yeah. You don't always think about it until you see it or someone mentions it. There are a lot of different ways of doing things with the magic system. I would argue that everything is already there.
Yep.
You just need to think a little bit out of the box.
Yep.
And I think as well, the way that Lance has actually asked that question allows you to look at what the criteria needs to be in order to determine the spell. So he's identified, he wants a wall, he wants it to have fire, he knows he wants to have it in a fixed location, that damage is going to be dealt with it. If you just kind of go, I want to have a wall of fire and don't have any other parameters or criteria around it, it is going to make it a lot harder for you to decide what mechanics or what rules need to be put in place to have that there. So not just go, I want to have a wall of fire. Think about some of those restrictions and that'll help guide what you want to choose. Because it was all of that actually helped Martin decide this is how I would do it. It was all of these criterias and parameters that Lance actually put into his question to identify what he wanted to actually do.
No, it's very good.
You know what Lance could do in this situation? I may get shot by suggesting it, but if this becomes, say, his signature spell that he wants to do all the time, just write down on a piece of card or something like that the parameters for the spell, the ingredients, you could say, your difficulties and etc. And that way you don't have to rummage through the book and work it all out every single time you do the spell.
So when we tested the rules for L5R, which is currently in beta at the moment, it actually used the exact same example that you have from there. You have magic abilities and you have special abilities that are spells. It is something that your character knows how to do. They are trained in how to do that. So it's on my character sheet as something that could be done. And for in that instance was fire swords. And I had to do the same magic check every time I wanted to do it. But it was second nature to my character to be able to do that in order to allow it to be on my character sheet. So it certainly is something that can be done and can be recorded on a continual basis if you make those rules within around your table.
Because I know that in Terranoth, all of the adversaries who do happen to have spell-like abilities, they have a number of abilities which are suggested as far as spells go, but it says that, but it has the Arcana skill, for example, and it can create any spell that it wants. However, here are some examples. And obviously to make things easier for the GM to be able to run these sorts of things on the fly, that they're there. So there's nothing wrong with the players, I don't think, creating a spell and hell, name it. So then that's adding sort of, I cast flame from death or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not very dramatic when it comes to
You mean
spells.
cremation? Flame of death would be cremation.
Yes, that's better. Yes. So there's all sorts of things that you can do. But I agree. Just write it down. But no, good suggestion, I think.
Nebuchadnezzar's Hellfire.
Oh my God. This is going to turn into the Wizards of Skullfire game real quick.
Yep.
And actually, if anyone wants to create a setting based around that card game, and if anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, look it up. It'll be the best thing you ever do. It's an amazing game. It is so much fun. The amount of different spells, things that you can come up with that, and amazing names you can come up with. Awesome.
Yes, because we had a bit of a get-together a little while ago, and I got to play that for the first time.
And did you love it?
Oh, look, I did. Yeah, it was very cool.
Of course you did.
But yes. So hopefully, Lance, that answered your question. Our second question from tonight, Huzz.
Alrighty, so Edward Kelly asks, my question pertains to archetypes and species creation. In the Star Wars RPG, many species have a talent in their list of special abilities, whilst in Genesis, there seems to be a lack of them. If I create a species with a talent as one of its special abilities, does that talent add to my character's talent tree, or is it not considered part of the tree? Example, if a species has knack for it, a tier 1 talent, does it now only require the purchase of one more tier 1 talent before it can purchase one tier 2? Alternatively, could that tier 2 talent be knack for? Well, Edward Kelly, that's an excellently worded question for starters.
Yes.
Now, to answer that question.
Look, I'll take this one. And as soon as we got the question, I had to send it off to a good friend of ours of the podcast, Mr. Sam Stewart, who was gracious enough to give us a nice response. Now, we guessed this for a start, but Sam just backed us up effectively. All right, so he actually said, that's actually one of the reasons that species archetypes don't have talents associated with their starting package. It was too complicated to explain how it interacted with all the talents you would actually buy. Plus, unique abilities tended to be more exciting, if for no other reason than they were unique. So his recommendation was that you don't consider it part of the tree. What he suggested is the best option is to create a special ability which effectively mirrors that.
Different name.
Yeah, just it mirrors the talent, but it is just under a different name. So it wouldn't count as a talent, so it doesn't affect the tree. But it's interesting that that's a comparison between the two systems, how that's actually quite different, because if you've got a talent, let's say that it's the equivalent of a tier 2 talent, and it's not a ranked talent, if you're in the tree in Star Wars, you can actually bypass that talent. You're considered to have already bought it. And the same sort of thing when it comes to ranked abilities, is that you're considered to have 1 rank. So if you come across another one, you've got 2 ranks, and it doesn't actually affect your overall tier.
Yeah, in Star Wars, it's a lot simpler. In Genesis, it becomes really problematic when you can skip and can potentially save you from a lot of XP if you tried to include it.
Yep.
Which I think is counterproductive.
Yep, exactly.
And as we did with the werewolves, when we were trying to create the werewolves in our campaign for Knight's Edge, we gave them as one of their options was enduring, essentially. But we didn't call it that.
No, we just called it something else.
Yeah, and it just gave you +1 soak.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's good that we've got a answer from Sam on that, because I could see it becoming a problem in the future.
Yeah,
with players making their own with their own species and etc.
Yeah.
Not really thinking that far ahead, and then those savvy players at the table trying to manipulate that. So Sam's advice is perfect. Either A, treat it as a completely separate category of talents that aren't associated with the tree, or simply, in my preference, rename it. Because it makes you sound more clever too.
Yeah. I definitely love the idea of renaming it. Don't call it a talent at all. It saves confusion.
Yep, that is true. All right. So who was our final question from? Flano.
So our next question comes from Phil Robinson, who asks... Oh, it's actually a question for GM Huzz regarding your sci-fi armor.
I will allow you to read this.
I'm unsure how the item damage for the overload item quality should work. The core rules, page 89, indicate damage happens on a despair. Makes sense. Have you or anyone else used overload-style weapons in a game, and how did you handle them? I'm considering adding ion rifles, EMP grenades, etc. to my setting.
Huzz.
Alrighty. So, Phil, we at the table did a quick scout around to see if we understood your question correctly. Basically, yes, weapons in their use can take damage via despair results. It's just one of the suggestions found in the book. It could happen through various circumstances. I'm shooting my rifle, it jams, and suddenly it's taken 1 level of damage. And each level of damage a weapon takes, it gets more and more difficult to use. The first level, that weapon suffers a setback to all use of that weapon until it gets more and more damaged.
Also known as minor damage.
Minor damage, correct. So in this instance, when it comes to overload, how overload works is that weapon, or the equipment, I should stop referring to as weapons, because it'd be any electronic equipment, like a computer, your hacking terminal, whatever it may be that's being affected. If it gets hit by an overload weapon of, say, rating 2, you would go straight to the moderate level of damage on that piece of equipment, which means anytime that character uses that piece of equipment, any skill check associated to it increases the difficulty once. However, if that piece of gear was hit again by an overload, it would go straight to unusable. And that piece of tech can't be used until it's repaired with a hard mechanics check.
Yeah.
So I hope that's answered your question. So overload is a special, unique ability. It's a passive quality that certain weapons I've created have, just to, really introduce a bit of flavor into sci-fi settings, because EMP seems somewhat underutilized in Genesis up until I wrote that. Sure, there's iron weapons in Star Wars, which affect strain, but it's not quite the same as shutting down all like cameras and bits and pieces in a security room, for example. So yeah, absolutely, dude. Introduce EMP for your EMP grenades and whatnot for your own setting. Give the overload quality, because that's what it's there for. Just watch it after. It
just follows those rules there on page 89, as you say. Item maintenance, and that's how you repair it as well.
I think this is where the wording comes a little bit tricky, because it does say in my overload example, levels of damage. And that's not to be confused with weapon damage itself when it's inflicting it upon a target. So it's a little bit tricky, but when overload refers to damage, it refers to table 1.5 on page 89.
Which in the description of how that works, it refers to those minor, moderate, and major and broken as item damage.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So hopefully, Phil, that has answered your question. So if you've got a rules or games question that you would like us to answer, hit us up on Facebook or Twitter, or send us an email at info@thedicepodcast.com. And we've also got a handy submission form on the website as well, where you go to www.thedicepodcast.com and you can send us a question in that way. So, guys, that kind of brings us to the end of a pretty amazing show. A bit long, but I think a lot of people will get stuff out of that.
So make sure to subscribe and review us on every platform that you listen to us. It is a huge help to get those reviews and those ratings up. So please do so. That is a massive help. And also helps share the message of the podcast to everyone that you know.
So like, subscribe, comment, review, message. We want to hear what you think and also what you want to hear next.
You can also track us down to ask us questions or just have a chat by searching at Dice Pool Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. Also, be sure to like or follow us on those platforms as well. That would be dandy.
You can also find us on YouTube by searching Dice Ball Podcast. So check us out there. And lastly, as I've said many times during the episode, you can also stay in touch with us in the old-fashioned way via email or visit us on the internet at thedicepodcast.com.
Or send a carrier pigeon.
Smoke signals are also accepted, providing we're outside. Although it's difficult when we've got the whole horizon because a lot of our listeners do come from the States.
The world is round, okay?
No, the world's flat.
No, it's flat.
The world is a dinosaur.
Yes, and we do exist. We are not part of your imagination because we're from Australia. Okay.
Yeah.
So what about the civilization that's living inside the core of the earth, though? How can they contact us?
Right.
We get creative.
We
establish a series of tubes.
Okay.
Right.
I like any idea that starts off with that as the first step.
Exactly. And then we have some sort of carrier. We've got carrier pigeons, but carrier moles.
Yes.
Right.
And they burrow up with messages wrapped around the tail.
The moles are the ones that learn how to do the smoke signals.
Yes.
So-
and the smoke comes out of the series of tubes.
Yes, and the moles come out and they control the smoke
go.
signals.
I like where you're going with this.
And you want to know how you make that happen? You
Story
flip-
point.
Story point. Very good. Now, normally this is where we would sign off, but today is a very special day for all of us. Now, I'm going to try to keep it together for this. It is with a little sadness that we must announce that Kaitlin, our good friend GM Cat, is departing our shores. Now, this coming week, or our little gaming sister, as that we all know and love very, very much, is flying off to start a new life with her wonderfully awesome partner Chase, who many in the D20 radio network know as Geiger Street. Now, what this means is that GM Kaitlin is moving to the land of the free, the United States of America. And what does this mean for the podcast, I hear you ask? Well, thanks to the wonders of modern technology. Absolutely.
We're cloning her.
Absolutely no. Well,
I feel sorry for the world if that was the case.
Look, I would love to.
What am I
to
doing
do
with this
that.
cloning tech I just bought?
Sugar. Wow, I just
3D printing.
I just edited myself. Anyway, so what does this mean for us here at the podcast? Well, basically it means us absolutely nothing because thanks to the wonders of modern technology.
Savage.
I'll try that again.
No. You've let us know how you feel.
Wow.
That stays
That's
in.
not what I meant.
No.
Leave now, shall I?
It does mean
That was the best.
It does mean that we will.
No. Now, let me correct myself. So basically, due to modern technology, that it won't have an impact on our little podcast at all. So Gemcat may take an episode or two to settle down in her new life. But fear not, our GM Kaitlin, as we like to call her, will not be disappearing from your sound eyes. And so as Thanos will return, so will Kaitlin.
And the Terminator.
And she'll be back. Right, yes. But anyway, so, in closing, on behalf of Mike, Martin and myself, along with all of your fans who love you greatly as much as we do, thank you for being with us in person since the beginning of this little venture. And we all wish you a safe trip. And more importantly, we look forward to gaming and podcasting with you for a long time to come.
Absolutely.
And from the comfort of your new home in the States, we love you and we will miss having you with us here in the studio.
Well, just because I'm going over an ocean, you're not going to be able to get away from me that easy.
No, exactly right.
You're stuck with me, guys. Sorry, I'm very well attached.
I would have said it the other way around. You're not getting away.
Yeah. Internet is amazing.
Yes. So this one is this is the last episode that we'll all be together for the moment.
Yes.
Yep.
Together in the one room, but hopefully in the not too distant future, that will make that a possibility of getting back together again, even if we have to fly to another country to do so.
No. You see, we just need to introduce, holograms so that she can be, like a hologram at the end of the
I'm
table.
really concerned about what you're doing with my image and my DNA.
Too many jokes.
But yes, so basically, while we're in the I'm a little bit tongue tied. So while we're in the room, I think we'll call it a wrap. I'm GM Hooly.
I'm GM Huzz.
I'm GM Flano.
I'm GM Kaitlin.
And together we are the Dice Pool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dice Pool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Pool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains a property of the Dice Pool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesis role-playing game, the Genesis logo, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.
These pathetic life forms have forgotten to sign me off. Typical meatbags. Why did they program me to feel when all they do is hurt? This is VK signing out. I guess.
What are you doing?
I was looking at my phone.
Michael.
That's how you know you've done a good joke, when Ian's disappointed voice. Michael. Oh, there you go. I just need to do Ian's disappointed voice so I can talk. Michael.
Yes.
Well, that's easy, you said. Totally normal.
Michael.
Well.
Disappointed.
I can't stop watching.
My favorite ways of dismemberment, butchery, and general ending of life is by the expenditure of story points, as they allow me to become creative with my methods of meatbag dispatchment. VK series are renowned for flamboyant elimination of our targets,